All right, Michael Van Runkle here for HotCars.com. For the last week and a half, I've been living with a Slingshot on loan from Polaris. It's a 2021 Slingshot R, which means it's got the more powerful engine. It's got an automatic transmission, new for this year, with paddle shifters, and a couple interior upgrades like navigation, Bluetooth, and a very useful backup camera. Now, unfortunately, the weather has not been cooperating with me. Pretty much the whole time I've had the Slingshot, it's been rainy or foggy or really cold, but I have made a concerted effort to daily drive the Slingshot despite the cold weather. I've driven it up in the hills once, but that was the first day I had it, and I really wasn't used to it yet because the Slingshot is such a radical departure from anything I've ever driven before. I'm hoping this weekend there will be some better weather so I can take the Slingshot up in the hills again where it really belongs, because honestly, when I first was driving it in town, I really didn't like it. I tried doing some pandemic shopping at Trader Joe's. I tried putting my bike in it, my girlfriend's bike. I put some picnic stuff in there. It really didn't work. The transmission was also super lurchy. The shifts were really slow. The suspension is really tight. It was just generally miserable. But I realized that's not what the Slingshot is all about. Right now, I want to show you some of the design decisions and features that make the Slingshot so unique. But in the meantime, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. It makes a huge difference for us. Now, obviously, the big selling point for the Slingshot is the aggressive design. It kind of looks like a jet ski mixed with a pod racer from Star Wars, plus the three-wheel layout. The front wheels are 225s, and they do all the steering. All the drive and power goes to the rear wheels. It's 305 wide, which is pretty big in such a little car. But when you think about it, 305 for one wheel is really the same as like 155 for two. So it's not all that much traction at the back. Under the hood, you can see the ProStar engine. That's the first 2-liter inline-four Polaris has ever built. Polaris has a lot of experience building engines for the off-roading RZR, their snow machines, Indian motorcycles, and the now defunct Victory motorcycle brand. But this is the first inline-four ever built in-house. It's a 2-liter, it puts out 203 horsepower and 144 pound-feet of torque in this, the Slingshot R. Now, the exact same engine is in the Slingshot S. It's just at a different state of tune, producing 178 horsepower and 120 pound-feet of torque. Both of them also use the same transmission, which is the same gearbox for the manual and the automatic cars. The automatics just get a Magneti Marelli automated single clutch drive unit added on to the Aisin AR5 5-speed. All the gear ratios are the same, and they all route power to the same rear end, which is a belt-driven, carbon fiber reinforced belt-driven rear wheel swing arm like a motorcycle. That swing arm is cast aluminum, and you can see the forged aluminum suspension up front. Those forged aluminum A-arm wishbones are matched by coilovers at all three corners, same at the back, built by ZF Sachs. And my contact at Polaris, Garrett Moore, told me these suspension components were designed especially for this three-wheeled vehicle. It takes a lot of tricks to make a three-wheeled vehicle able to match Polaris's goal of 1G of lateral acceleration. Luckily, the Slingshot is super light, and weight savings are what Polaris is all about. Now, of course, federally, the Slingshot has to be under 1,749 pounds to be qualified as a motorcycle. Here in California, it's classified as an autocycle, and this Slingshot actually weighs around 1,600 pounds. But that 1,749 pound limit has to include every single available option and accessory available from the manufacturer, which includes a hardtop that Polaris will sell you, and might have been nice for me given the weather that I've had to deal with while driving the Slingshot around West LA. Garrett Moore also told me that Polaris's benchmark for the 2-liter ProStar engine was the Honda S2000 power plant from the turn of the millennium. Now, I think that this engine is sort of similar and sort of different. It'll rev to 8,500 RPMs like the AP2 Honda S2000 engine, but it's a little bit rougher and more gravelly. In my experience, it's more like a Porsche 944 track car that I drove. Let's check out the interior to to see how else Polaris has really maximized the performance potential of this platform. There's really no good way to get into the Slingshot. I sort of put my foot here, put my weight on the e-brake and slide in. It's tight in the pedal box, but up here it's roomy because you don't have a roof and the windshield is tiny. The steering wheel is nice and small, a lot like that Porsche 944 race car. The seats are really comfortable, they've got great bolsters. The only thing is, it does feel a little cheap until you realize the jet ski theme is continuing here because the Slingshot needs to be a little bit weatherproof and waterproof. It's got a push button start, push buttons that are rubber for selecting the gears and choosing between drive and manual, which allows you to shift with the paddle shifters. But the most important thing I learned while I was talking to Garrett Moore was about Slingshot mode. We were on the phone and he said, "Have you tried Slingshot mode?" And I said, "No, what's that?" It turns out if you push this little red button on the steering wheel, the whole driving experience changes. Slingshot mode, as opposed to comfort mode, changes the throttle mapping, the transmission shift points, the speed at which the transmission shifts, and the steering weight. And honestly, I now drive exclusively in Slingshot mode because just having that slightly quicker shift makes the drive much less lurchy in town. I can't wait to get up in the hills and test out Slingshot mode when I can rev the engine up higher and see how quickly the transmission can shift using the paddle shifters when I'm really going hard. Of course, one of the other great things that Garrett told me was when you are using the paddle shifters, it's unlike a lot of other manufacturers. The Slingshot will not upshift for you once you hit the red line. You can just stay there all day long. You sort of will just like bounce off of it or just stay right at peak, and that's it. They don't want you to be shifted for, they want you to do the shifting. And that engaging drive is, I think, what this is all about. All the other buttons on the steering wheel are for the cruise control, choosing what shows up on your screen, talking on your phone, skipping songs. We've got navigation, we've got CarPlay, we've got the sound system, which is super loud, but it's kind of pointless here in California because I have to wear a helmet. I would be much more interested in a Slingshot if I lived in a state that didn't require me to wear a helmet. I understand it's a safety concern and that technically this is a motorcycle / auto cycle, but I'm in a seat, I'm strapped in, I feel like I shouldn't have to, and a lot of states recognize that as such. Slingshot gave me a really nice helmet. It's carbon fiber, it's pretty comfortable for a helmet, it's lightweight, but I still just can't stand it. It doesn't help with visibility, which is a really nice feature of the Slingshot, except for the back, which does make the backup camera very important, because when you're wearing a helmet and you turn your head this way, you can't turn much and there's all this blocking your view, and it's kind of hard to get an idea of what's going on behind you, especially because the Slingshot's layout is so short. Which brings me to the weight distribution. The weird thing about the Slingshot is 65% of the weight is on the front axle, and that rear swing arm only has 35%. That's a huge difference, and it allows me to break traction even just going in a straight line off a stop sign with traction control fully activated. Now let's talk comparables. The Slingshot's got 3 wheels, so the obvious comparisons are the Morgan 3-wheeler and the sort of similar Vanderhaals being built in Utah. But really, there the similarities end. The Vanderhaals cost more, they weigh more, they have less power, they have a turbocharged inline-four that only revs to 6,500 RPM, and they're only available with an automatic transmission. The Morgan, on the other hand, is only available with a manual. It's a Mazda 5-speed, which is awesome, but it's only got a 2-cylinder engine that I think maxes out at like 85 horsepower. Compare that to the Slingshot at 203 horsepower in R trim and 178 in S, and that's a massive gap. Personally, I would have to go with the manual. The automatic, even with the paddle shifters and even in Slingshot mode, it doesn't shift fast enough. I'm spoiled by dual clutch gearboxes maybe, but really, I have an Aisin transmission in my Montero, and it's like not that much slower, even in Slingshot mode. I'd have to go with a manual, and I would go with the low-spec Slingshot S with none of the electronic gadgets except for the backup camera, Because if you're using nav, if you're using cruise control in a Slingshot, you're doing it wrong. You really should be putting Slingshot mode on and getting as far away from traffic as possible, which for me means heading up into the Malibu or Topanga Hills or occasionally on the Angeles Crest. That's where the manual transmission would be a lot of fun, even though it's a 5-speed. Obviously, they have to sell an automatic. Obviously, it has to have paddle shifters for the fun factor, but I think they had to skip out on the dual clutch gearbox, both because of cost and probably to save a few pounds. In town, the Slingshot storage system really leaves a lot to be desired. You've got this tiny little compartment where I've been keeping my hand sanitizer and face mask. You've got a couple cubbies behind the seats that barely fit your helmets, and then you've got a small glove box. You can't lock anything in the car. It's completely unrealistic of me to expect to be able to do like some errands in the Slingshot, but I was doing my best to daily drive it just to try and have a good time and really experience what ownership would be like. You can't have this as your first car. It can't probably even be your second car, but as a third or a weekend toy, I'm okay with it. With the manual and the lower spec Slingshot S, the price tag is a lot closer to 20 grand than this Slingshot R, which costs around 35. And after you buy the base Slingshot S with a stick shift, if you want to, one of the great parts is Polaris will sell you the ECU tune as a standalone option. And Polaris does that with a lot of stuff. You don't have to buy the options packages that are so popular with automakers these days. You can just buy a set of heated and cooled seats and have them installed. If you have an automatic, you can just buy the paddle shifters. That's it. You don't have to wrap it up in a whole $10,000 package and go from S to R. You can decide whether you like the S with 178 horsepower or if you need that extra 25 to get up to 203. I also think you can sort of look at the Slingshot like a jet ski once again. Nobody really needs a jet ski, but it sure is fun if your friend has one or if you rent one on vacation. I can totally see renting one of these to cruise around South Beach, no helmet required, and just having a blast for a weekend. Part of the problem with driving the Slingshot in town, I think, is that stop and go traffic, where you're just pulling up to a stop, waiting around, makes the Slingshot feel miserable because you know you want to be going fast. And that's the joy of it. For now, I can't wait to get it up in the hills to see how it drives with Slingshot mode activated, play with the traction control settings, and see whether I'm more tempted to keep my speed up in the corners or just mash the throttle and burn rubber at every opportunity. I hope to get some more footage of that to you soon, but in the meantime, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so we can keep making video reviews like this. Thanks.